So I'm just discussing I've done a lot of videos now on where my mindset was in college and the way that I was trying to understand, way I was understanding things and the way that I was viewing reality. So just a little bit more on that topic. Um, One thing that occurred was, like I said, I'd lost a lot of videos, and I wanted to get videos of when I was younger so I could study the swag flow, study how I moved, fix my shot, do all that stuff. And also I had discovered that I can only rap if I'm playing serious basketball. And I wanted to get back into basketball too. So I figured once I graduate from college, I'll do all that. And I thought to myself, I'll try to go to Israel, probably play professional basketball, and also maybe try to get power, get the quadrant stuff big, and maybe be proclaim the Messiah, and and then make sure once I get that power to get all the basketball videos that I can of when I was younger, so I could study what I did before the shooting machine, and study the swag flow and all that. I'm not going to get into details about what that is, but as I said though, at that time though, I didn't really understand reality that much, and I had very much leftist leanings, and I hadn't studied Orthodox Judaism, and I didn't really quite understand my grandpa's metapsychiatry. So just to go more into detail about the whole metapsychiatry stuff, I didn't really like my grandpa's stuff so much because I thought it was too religious, and I thought he might be a little bit white supremacist, and I'll get more into that later. But the white supremacist aspect too that I thought from my grandpa was his emphasis on being independent and hardworking. And there's nothing wrong with hard work, but his emphasis on, you got to work hard and you have to get a job. And I always saw that as more right winger oriented, like getting a job and not being dependent on people, and not getting handouts and stuff like that. And he wanted me to do that, and he wanted me to break free of my parents and to become independent. And the thing about that was, I felt that my parents misinterpreted it, and they were like, okay, yeah, make him independent, and so we'll just be emotionally distant, and we won't talk to him, and we will be, neglect him and dismiss him. And that's not what independent means, but but I feel like my grandpa did a lot of harm, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But kind of just to go over the way I was processing reality at this point was, I was reading the Bible with my grandpa a lot, and as I said, my grandpa was trying to teach me through the metapsychiatry perspective, like everything is energy, everything's one, and transcending the self and all that. But I was looking at the Bible through more of a physicalist, materialist, communistic lens. And just like one example of that would be Jesus is on the cross, and then the centurion says, I believe that he is God. And then after that, the Roman Empire falls. And in my view, the reason why the Roman Empire fell is because it adopted Christianity. So I was kind of like anti-Christian, and the reason why, and I was kind of anti-white. And I wanted to, like, one other example of that would be like, people would be like, oh, King Herod was an evil Jew and stuff. But I heard that he was actually an Edomite who converted to Judaism. So, and I heard that the Edomites were married in with the Hittites, and Hittites were Indo-Europeans. And I wanted to always see the white people as bad, because I was a leftist, and that's what leftists are. Leftists see people of color as good and white people as bad a lot. And so, that's the way I wanted to view things. And so I'm like, yeah, I want to make the Jews the good guys and the white people the bad guys, kind of like invert things. Because a lot of times the Arians would say like, oh, Jews are a synagogue of Satan. But then I looked at it and I'd be like, no, well, Jesus said that. But then in the next chapter, Jesus says the stone that the builder rejected will become the capstone. So I'm like, yeah, so the Jews will become the capstone. So yes, he rejected them, but then they're going to become the capstone. And I wanted to see reality that way. And a way that I kind of processed it was, I would be like, yes, in the Bible throughout it, it says like the Jews do not believe, they do not perceive, stuff like that. But then I'd be like, yeah, but that's important, because if you believe, you're not going to be in the flow, because you're going to be attached. So I'm using my grandpa's metapsychiatry, but I'm also incorporating it within a kind of my anti-white way of looking at things. So like, if you believe, you're not going to be in the flow. So not believing is actually good. And look, the Jews don't believe, but look how they're always saved. But the Gentiles, it always describes that they're believed. Like the Pharaoh, it says he believed in God. But what happened to Pharaoh? What happened to the Egyptians? They believed, it says. They believed in God, but then they're destroyed. But who survives? The Jews who did not believe in the end. But they ended up using the Passover lamb, which is representative of Jesus, and they ended up being saved. So I thought, yeah, so that Passover, Jesus on the cross saved the Jews. It didn't save all people, it saved his people, the Jews. So I wanted to make it only for the Jews. And again, it's probably my ego that was doing this. And I wanted to, because that's how I identified, and I wanted to make the Jews the good guys and the white people the bad guys. And I wanted to race mix the white people and defeat the white people. So I wanted to destroy Christianity, and I wanted to make Christianity about the Jews and the salvation of the Jews. And I thought, yeah, so what happened was Jews didn't believe, so they should have died from their sins. And what God does is he sends enemies to kill the Jews for their sins, which would be the Romans. But they use the lamb, the sacrifice, and it saves them from their sins. So they didn't believe, but they end up being saved. But the Romans, that says the Roman centurion believed, but who ends up being destroyed? The Roman Empire. The Romans believe and they're destroyed. So I wanted to invert it. And the way that I articulated it was in my mind, yes, because belief is not the flow. Belief is conformity, and the flow isn't necessarily non-conformity, but non-belief in disobedience can be closer to the flow. So I wanted to believe, yes, and that's why Adam and Eve were chosen, because God knew that they would disobey, just like the Jews were chosen. I was like, because God knew they would disobey, and disobedience is actually good because it's not conformity, and conformity is not the flow. That's the way I was trying to interpret it, trying to invert everything and make the good bad and the bad good. So just like another example of how I would look at that, like there's a story where the Philistines, they take the ark of God, but then, and it says they believe in God, right? But then it says that they all die, they get hemorrhages and all that stuff. And then the Jews get the ark back, and the Jews live. So I was like, yeah, the Jews lost the ark because they didn't believe, but then they destroy their enemies who did believe. So I was like, yes, this is again the metaphor of not believing is closer to the flow. And that's the way that I was looking at things, kind of inverting everything, subverting it. And ultimately, there was an anti-white thing involved with that. Like I would look at the Philistines more as white people because they're Indo-Europeans, and I'd be like, yes, this. So that's what I was trying to do. And I would look at the Jews as more Semites, more people of color. And just like another example of that would be well, anyways, you kind of get the picture. I was going to give another example, but I forget now. But yeah, so that was the way that I was trying to see things. And I had kind of that leftist, I was kind of leftist communist, and ultimately I wanted to destroy religion. And I will get to how I ended up interpreting Jesus allegorically and seeing it as an allegory of the destruction of the Roman Empire. And ultimately I wanted to just destroy Christianity and ultimately race mix everybody. And I thought that would be the way I could get power too. And, I wanted to get back into basketball and rap music. And why was I so into that? Partly maybe because basketball and rap music are like people of color stuff, and I was kind of anti-white. But I also really did want to figure out what was up with my shot. Like I didn't know, and I knew it was a shooting machine, but I wanted to fix it. I wanted to know. Like I'm a INTP 5W4. I want to know. That's ultimately what I really want. All the other stuff is kind of like on the side. Like really, I want to know. And I do think that the Aryan Jewish dialectic is an important aspect of reality. And I do remember like when I learned that David was a Philistine, or David's dad was Philistine and his mom was Jewish. And I would think to myself like, oh, so my dad's like German and my mom's Jewish. And I would think, okay, that's again, that Aryan Jewish dialectic going on. And I thought for myself as like David was like the Messiah. And I'm like, yes, I'm the Messiah too. And David would pretend to like the Jews, or to dislike the Jews, but then he would kill the Philistines because the Philistines would get his trust because he would pretend to dislike the Jews. And I thought that I would do the same thing. I would pretend to dislike the Jews, and then I would destroy the Germans. I would destroy the Aryans. See, I had that predatory mentality toward the white races, especially the Aryan race. And and I thought that I was like the King David at the time. Like I was the modern David, and that's what I would do. And save the Jewish people from the Nazis, right? And I knew that the white supremacists tended to be Nazis, which is nationalists. So I wanted to be the opposite. I wanted to be a communist, and I wanted to prove that the Bible was communistic, and that it was so then I'm contemplating how I can get power in Israel. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, one way I can do it is I'm not a nationalist. I'm not a religious person. I think that that's all white supremacy. I think nationalism is a form of white supremacy and religion is a form of white supremacy. It's for morality, and morality, the way I saw it, is just the the upper classes, the bourgeoisie creates laws and stuff to maintain their power, maintain the power of white people, and the darker races tend to be seen as less moral, but it's because they're mistreated. And now it's a typical leftist, they're mistreated. They don't have the same cultural capital and privilege, and they're really the good guys, and the white people are really the bad guys. And that's the way I wanted to see things, right? So I was a Marxist, a communist, and all that. And yeah, so the one way I thought that I could get power would be if I create like a society, a forecast society, with with the rationals, the guardians, the idealists, and the artisans, the four temperaments, and the 16 types of people. And I thought, one of the big reasons why I liked that idea was because, again, I was like, everybody's an individual. Don't worry about what race you are, because there's INTP black people, and there's INTP white people, and there's INFJ black people, and INFJ Asian people, and they're more like each other than people of their own race and stuff. And the best way to divide people would be based around temperaments and stuff like that. And ultimately, what I thought would be, yeah, it would create a good society, and it would also mix all the races, and then that would defeat the Aryan race. It would defeat the white people, who I thought were, as a leftist, I was anti-white. So so that was the way I kind of looked at things. And when I was talking to the rabbi, I wanted to get the quadrant model big in Israel and get power. And ultimately, once I got power, make sure I can get basketball videos when I was younger, get back into basketball, get back into rap music, and do all of that. And then the other thing, but like I said, what was going on at the time, that was my grandpa wanted me to get a job. And he was like, because you need to be independent. And he wanted to break me free of my mom and dad. And he thought that if I got a job, then I would let go of the quadrant model and stuff, because he didn't believe the quadrant model at that time. But I didn't tell him anything about my leftist communist beliefs. He just didn't believe the quadrant model. That was it. The quadrant, the fact that there's four things, and he didn't understand that. And I'll get to that more later. But but at the time, so he's trying to teach me his metapsychiatry stuff, and he's trying to tell me that how important working is, and all that stuff. And I'm thinking that he's just a white supremacist, and he's all into working, hard work, and all that. But it's just like, he's just like a fascist white supremacist guy. And I'm starting to disrespect my grandpa a little bit, because it's like, and I saw. I don't know. He was kind of getting on my nerves a little bit, and I didn't really understand metapsychiatry at the time, and he didn't teach me well. I only say this stuff very clearly now, after studying it for like 20 years or like 10 years. But the way that he taught me, I wasn't understanding it. He wasn't teaching me well, so he was confusing me. So then I graduated from college, and then I went on a trip to Israel, and I will discuss what happened on that trip to Israel and how it was kind of a culture shock, and it kind of shook me a little bit, because I was introduced there to Orthodox Judaism, and it confused me a little bit. And then I will describe what happened when I went to Kauai, how I ended up trying to destroy religion, but then ended up becoming a religious fanatic.